Hello, this is Mike Lawless, and in this video I'll discuss the batch simulation mode in GastroPlus. Batch simulation is used to perform a single simulation for each selected record in the current dataset. Records can be selected using database select subset by, and I'll demonstrate how that works. Output files are written to a user-specified file, either an ASCII file or an Excel file, and it can write either individual files or worksheets in an Excel spreadsheet. As the simulation proceeds, the name of the current record is shown on the simulation tab, for example, drug number 10 out of 20, including the record name. To set up a batch simulation, you simply go to the Simulation tab and then click on the Batch Simulation button here. This will bring up a dialog box which includes the save option. So you can save the overall results. This will save simple things such as the fraction absorbed and oral bioavailability, etc. And I'll show an example of that saved in an Excel spreadsheet. You can also select to save single profiles. So for example, if you want to save CP time curves for the 10 compounds or however many compounds are in your database, we click this button and then you can save it in different formats specified here: when non-len, Excel with a single time column or individual time columns. You can save selected profiles as individual records. So this would create individual files or worksheets in Excel, or you can just save all the profiles. So this is a very comprehensive list here. You can also export or save the CP time curves in these IPD files, which can be read within the load IPD or OPD files, and I'll show that briefly. You can also use individual simulation time. So let's say every record in your database has a different simulation time, so you would click on this button, and this is compatible only with the individual time column. So you'd have to have an individual time column for each of these. So you'd have to click this and the individual time column here. As part of the selected profiles, when you click on this button, this dialog box comes up, and one of the defaults is just to save the CP time curve for the venous return. If you click here, then you can select up to 20 other profiles, such as the unbound brain concentration. So you can use this dialog box here to specify the specific outputs that you'd like to see in the program. Now let's take a look at batch simulation mode in GastroPlus. In this data set, I've got 10 compounds. They were extracted from the Kimball database in a set that AstraZeneca donated with human hepatocyte clearance. And towards the end of this, I'll show some tips on how to speed up the import of these molecules into GastroPlus. So if we go to the simulation module, we can click on the batch simulation mode, and it will bring up this dialog box as I discussed in the slides. And let's just do a simple example. We're just going to save the overall results and have them at a fixed simulation time of 24 hours. So click OK here. So that sets it up. Then when I click on Run Batch, the first thing it's going to do is prompt me for the output file. And I'm just going to put it in a desktop file and specify that it needs to go into an Excel workshop. So I'll just call it test10.xls. And then I'll click OK. And you'll see that as it's running, it displays what record it's on out of the 10, and then also displays summary information, in this case the fraction absorbed, FDP, and the oral bioavailability of the compounds. You'll see for these it runs fairly quickly. Okay, now it's finished. Let's take a look at the output Excel file that I have here. It's got the 10 records listed as the row, also the version number of GastroPlus, the date it was run, and the time, record number, formula, the predicted oral fraction absorbed, oral bioavailability. Then as we scroll further to the right, Cmax, Tmax, the AUC, and then the fraction absorbed for each one of the compartments in the GI tract. Then we have some simulated non-compartmental values: clearance, volume of distribution, area under the curve. Scrolling further to the right, you'll see the setup of the molecule, each molecule. So the species it's run on, the measured PEF, the simulated PEF, etc. So a lot of information in here in the output file, the dosage form, and then as we get further in, it's going to show the parameters for the simulation FUP, what ASF model it is, etc. So a complete list of the parameters. Okay, this time let's do a little bit more complicated output file. So here I'm going to select on Save Selected Profiles. This will bring up this dialog box. Right now the default is to display or output the CP time curve in the venous return. If I click on this button, it'll bring up an additional box, and let's look at the pharmacokinetics and also get the unbound plasma concentration and the unbound and bound brain concentration. So now we're asking for 4 profiles to be output. We would just click exit here, and we should just have a single time file if we used a fixed time for this. So we'll just click OK. This will run each simulation for a 24-hour time. Then when we click on the run batch command, it's going to prompt output file. This time we'll call it CP brain, and we'll put that into an Excel file. And then click Save. Now it starts running through these. Now the program has finished running all 10 compounds. So let's take a look at the output file. So this is just a single Excel file with various worksheets in it. The second worksheet here is the CP plasma concentration for the unbound concentration of the compound. And again, here we have all the simulation times in one column here, and then the various compounds here. So we could highlight as many as we want here in Excel, and then go into Insert and display a chart. So that would be the chart for all those in the unbound plasma concentration. Here is the unbound brain concentration, and then the bound concentration. Now let's talk about some of the other options here. If we go into the Simulation tab and go back to the very first record, you'll see that this is set up for a 6-hour simulation. I'll use Control N to go to the second record. This is for a 10-hour simulation and a 12-hour. So some of these records have different simulation times. Now if I want to pick that up in the batch output and just run these to the specified simulation time, I would need to go to the individual time columns and also specify the individual simulation times. And so instead of running each simulation for the default 24 hours, it's going to use the value for each compound in this particular field. Another option within GastroPlus is to simply use a subset of the database. So we have 10 records here, and if I go under database and select by subset, let's select PEF range here and specify 0 to 1. So when I click OK, it starts going through each record in the database and filters it based on the PEF value. So for the compounds here have a PEF value between 0 and 1. So the first one's 0.55, 0.56, 0.62, and then the last record's 0.78. So then when I go into the simulation, I can run batch simulations just for these records. So let's specify batch output again, and then this time let's output CP time curves. So I'll click OK. Then when I click Run Batch, the first thing it's going to do is prompt me for the output file again. Now for this, I would recommend creating a directory. So let's just call it SOPD files, because this is going to create more than one. Now it is going to also create a summary file that can go in here with the setup parameters. And then it says if there's duplicate names in there, it's going to rename them. That's a good reason, another good reason to just create this in a folder. So we'll let that run. It'll only take a few seconds for 4 records. Now it's finished. This is the subdirectory where I asked the program to store the files, and you'll see the SOPD files in here, and then a summary Excel file again. Now if we want to open these files, we can go under File, Load OPD File, which bring up this dialog box, and then we can do File, Open, over. We want to change this to the simulated oral plasma concentration time. Then we go through here and we can bring up these, and it'll display that curve. So those are some of the different options on the output file and in batch mode. Now typically what I would want to do in batch mode is run a large number of compounds. So generally recommend only putting about 400 or 500 molecules into a database. One thing you can do to speed up the import of the molecules is to not display the structure. So let's start with a new database, and I'll just create this very quickly on the desktop. So we've got a blank database, and then I'm going to input a structure file here. And in this case, this is going to be a pretty large data set. It's going to be this AstraZeneca, and there's 366 compounds here. So if I click OK, it's going to run through each one of those and kind of pre-process each of the 366 records. When that's finished, it'll bring up the import dialog box. And you see along here, there's different options: draw and display the structure, draw and hide, or just simply do not draw. I'm just going to take defaults of everything else. And you'll see when I do this that it really runs through each one of these compounds very quickly and updates the values in the database. And then once it's finished, it's going to display these records. So now we have 367. Of course, the first one is blank. I'll go ahead and delete that. And then you can see that it's got 366 records, and it read those in very quickly. This slide simply summarizes what I've discussed in this video. With batch simulations, you can perform single simulations for each selected record in the current database. Records can be selected using database select subset by. The option I showed there was to filter by PEF. There's also molecular weight and other options on filtering the database. Output files are written to a user-specified file. This can either be an ASCII file or an Excel file. You can also export individual files for each record, or it could be worksheets in the Excel file. The different options for exporting can be just the overall results. This file is always created under any of the other options, and it contains the molecule and simulation input parameters and then output parameters such as oral bioavailability and fraction absorbed. You can also specify up to 20 different concentration profiles. For example, you could export plasma and brain concentrations, both in the bound and unbound state of the molecule. It can write out IPD files. The S stands for the simulated, so the IV dose or other dosage forms here. And then you can also specify different time lengths that are into the individual records, or you can just run all your simulations at the same time length. So I want to thank you for watching the video. Again, you can send me an email at mlawless@simulations-plus.com if you have any questions or need additional information. Thanks for your time.